Good morning. Oh, clearly the speaker works because if I didn't have one, you would not hear me. Well, welcome. Oh my gosh. Welcome to Mile High Data Day, everybody. Woo! As jazzed up as we can as data aficionados. And yes, you are in that safe place today where you can rest assured that the person sitting next to you will not go into catatonia as we talk about all the things that we're excited to be here today. Don't worry, those of you who know me, this is not a stand-up routine. And for those of you who don't, my name is Jennifer Newcomer, and I'm the executive director for the Data Initiative, which is a program of the Piton Foundation. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all this morning, and I'm going to take a couple minutes to actually tell you a little bit about the Data Initiative for those of you who don't know who we are and what we do, and then I'm going to get the rest of the day rolling. So for over 25 years, the Data Initiative has been dedicated to demonstrating the value of making data-informed decisions to improve the lives of low-income children and their families. We do applied research and create data-driven solutions that provide nonprofits and foundations and government agencies and community organizations to be empowered with the information that they need to drive social change. By providing greater access to free information and providing technical assistance, we're enabling those organizations to be able to better serve the people who they're working on behalf. In addition, we pride ourselves in our ability to really process and transform neighborhood level data into something that is actionable, so that those communities can be better represented in the issues that they're facing. Just real quickly, in the materials that you received at registration, you will find our Data Initiative 2015 annual report. This just provides you with some more information about the work that we do, and highlights some of the significant accomplishments that we achieved this past year. One of which that we're particularly proud of is the relaunch of our flagship product, digital information tool, Community Facts. As our region has continued to change and grow, the Data Initiative has shifted its focus from what has historically been a Denver-centric one to a 7-county metro view. And the relaunch of Community Facts is the first public-facing tool that has this expanded geographic footprint. It's amazing to see everybody here today. There are actually a number of you who are in the room who are our Community Facts stakeholders. And, it's just really enlightening to see the interest that we received through planning for today's event to make sure that those organizations that are represented in this room today are here and are impassioned about making sure that we are opening up data to be able to drive the decisions that better serve those communities. In this upcoming year, we're excited at the Data Initiative to be able to expand our reach geographically and within our service lines to really advance our mission and better serve the entire region. Because the Data Initiative has been focused on pioneering a data-driven culture, we're really excited about this event today to be able to build this community of practitioners and advocates for open data, so that we're really strengthening and building a network and sharing best practices and learning from experts who are in the room across different subject matter areas, so that we can strengthen these partnerships in advancing all of our work. Just quickly, I would be remiss to say that, we could not have pulled off today's event without all of the data initiative staff's efforts. But two people in particular, Ming Ming Zhang and Kelly Nelson over there, they're just very... They were truly instrumental in making sure that the vision that we had for Mile High Data Day really became a reality. And I think that's definitely shown in the fact that this room is pretty much maxed out. So beyond that, though, we are so very grateful and honored to have been able to partner with the very esteemed organizations who have representatives here to be able to come up and tell you a little bit more about their organizations and why they've been involved in today's planning. So I personally, on behalf of the Data Initiative team, want to thank Mile High Connects and OpenColorado, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, and the University of Colorado at Denver for their valued partnership in putting today's event together. And so I invite them to each come up and introduce themselves and take it from there.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Davian Gagne, and I'm from Mile High Connects. A lot of you are probably familiar with our organization, but I'll provide you a quick snapshot of what we're up to here in the region. So we are a cross-sector collaborative of nonprofits, banks, and foundations looking at the build-out of the transit system here in the region and trying to leverage change and give access to affordable housing, quality jobs, good paying jobs, education, and health. And we are particularly focused on low-income communities and communities of color. And we've been in existence since about 2011. And we are really excited about today. First of all, we've been partnering really closely with the Piton Foundation probably since our inception. And they really helped us to leverage a lot of our data and thoughts through the Regional Equity Atlas. A lot of you may have used that for some of your work out in the community. But that was really instrumental for us to make the case for really understanding why the build out of transit is really important for leveraging change for low-income communities. So we really appreciate our continued relationship and partnership with the Piton Foundation. And we are really excited today that all of you are here. I was getting a lot of emails and phone calls like, can you please get me into day-to-day? I was like, what, me? Why are you emailing me? I'm not planning this. Like, well, if a spot opens up, just call me and let me know. I'm like, okay, I will do that. So it's great to see that there's such a strong appetite for information and that we are all using this really to leverage change. I'm sure we all use this to make the case for our missions in our organizations. We use it to make the case for policy change, which is really critical and probably at the core of a lot of our work. And so we are really happy that everyone is here. I hope this, continues in the next year or so, that we can have another gathering and maybe like be 250 or even 300 people, and they won't call me anymore. But thank you all for coming and spending this day with us. We are really excited. We hope that you get inspired about all the information and different innovative ideas that are going to be talked about today. So thanks.
Good morning. I'm Scott Primo with OpenColorado, and first I'd like to say thank you to everybody for coming out. Looks like we've got a really good cross-section of different groups, and I also want to say thank you to everybody at Piton who helped put this together and get us here today. And frankly, I'm just looking forward to learning from a lot of you. There's a lot of really intelligent people here doing incredibly innovative things with open data, so I think it's going to be an exciting day. In terms of OpenColorado, we are a nonprofit organization that provides an open data platform for cities, counties, and other governmental organizations to share their data. So it's free to use for them. Basically, anyone can come and sign up and start sharing data through our site. There's some customizations available for cities that want to create their own front end based on the OpenColorado data catalog. And so really the goal of all of that is to create a centralized resource for all this data that we have across the state. So we have Denver, Boulder, and a handful of other cities sharing data. Dr. Cog publishes data through to our catalog. So we're excited to see kind of a continually growing group of cities and counties and groups that share information and are creating a whole resource across the state so you don't have to go to multiple sources. So with that, I'll just say thank you again for coming, and I'm looking forward to getting to know more of you and having a great day. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ashley Summers. I'm with the Denver Regional Council of Governments. And on behalf of Dr. Cog, I'd like to say thank you so much for being here. Many of you probably know that in years past, the Dr. Cog hosted a regional data summit, and we haven't been able to do that for the past few years. So we're even more excited to be here because this event is similar in mission and the goal to get people to network and collaborate and make connections specifically around data and making great data for our region. So we're very excited to be a part of this day. Dr. Cog's mission overall as a regional planning organization is to bring the regional partners and jurisdictions together in the region to better plan for land use, aging issues, transportation issues throughout the region for many years to come. And so one of the things that makes us successful is meeting with people like you, learning from you, and sharing these ideas. So this day is very important to us. There are several Dr. Cog staff members here. Raise your hands back there, guys. Here we go. So please take an opportunity today to meet with them and share with them what you're working on and find out what we have to offer as well. We do have one thing I'd like to draw your attention to this afternoon, which is a workshop featuring our newest website edition, the Denver Regional Visual Resources site. This is our latest attempt to turn data into information for the public's benefit, for you all to use. We're really focused right now on this idea of helping to inform decisions through better data and making more information available on our website and through other means as well. So again, thank you all for being here. We're excited to be here, and let's have a great day.
Hi, I'm Austin Troy from the University of Colorado, Denver. I am the chair of the urban planning program here, which is located in the College of Architecture and Planning. So first of all, I'd like to welcome you to University of Colorado, Denver. And also wanted to reiterate the thanks going out to the people who planned this, Kelly and particularly Kelly Ming, who put so much hard work into making this happen. I also wanted to give a thanks to the staff of the university here who helped so much in setting this up. In particular, I don't know if he's still there, Leo Darnell over in the corner, who did a really fantastic job working with Ming and Kelly and getting all these facilities ready for all of you to use today. So just a couple of brief words on the university. Just actually, out of curiosity, show of hands, how many of you are University of Colorado Denver alums or graduates? Awesome, good to see that. I'm part of the College of Architecture and Planning. We have programs in architecture, landscape architecture, planning, historic preservation, graduate and undergraduate degrees. And so we work with a lot of the partners who are out here in the audience today. We're very interested in data. I also want to give one other shout out, which is to the Facility for Advanced Spatial Technologies, the FAST lab, which is our GIS lab here on campus. And they're very involved in GIS in the community here, and hopefully, we can build some additional relationships through this event today. So with that, I will just say thank you very much and welcome to the University of Colorado, Denver.
Well, thank you again to our critical partners. Today's event wouldn't really be possible without them and the networks that they bring to the table. So now I'm actually going to hand it off to my colleague, Matt Berry. He was essentially my predecessor in overseeing the data initiative and is now at Gary Community Investments, including the Piton Foundation, and is our Vice President of Strategic Assessment Work. and he's going to take you through just some of the day's logistics and introduce our speaker, Spike.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to see you, and it's funny for me because this is like a serendipitous reunion of sorts. There's people like that I do current work with. There's people I worked with 10 years ago in all kinds of different areas, all the way back from my days at DRCOG to community change work in neighborhoods, and it's just awesome to see you all here. And I love the cross sector of folks we have in the room. And what would it be starting a data conference without doing some data about who's in the room? And so to start with, you all responded when we registered for the conference, some kind of vital statistics about yourself, which is a nod to my vital stats peeps over here that have been incredibly valuable in terms of community data access. So we have a really cool spread of folks across the room, ranging from government to nonprofit, community organizations, academia, community, for-profit students, and other. So maybe one of your goals through the rest of the day is to find out who is the other in the room, who's not one of these categories. I'd be curious to know who didn't identify with any of those. So if someone can come back, maybe we'll get a bonus prize at the end. Building off that, when we asked what the primary nature of people's work was, the big ones, which aren't too surprising, are demographics, education, land use planning, economic development, mental health and policy. But there's some really interesting ones that I think, again, I would encourage you as we kind of move into networking parts of the day to find people who identified with part of what they bring to the room is social justice, food environment work, employment and labor, seniors and elderly. I think it's exciting to see, again, how diverse the crowd is in this room, and what their interest and subject areas are that they could. You can imagine all the different partnerships and types of collaboration that could occur across all these different categories. Excuse me. So thank you all for coming, knowing that the top category of what are the greatest challenges facing using data is dedicating time to do the data work itself. I think Jennifer and I were joking last week when we had the snow days. It was one of the only times I can remember in recent history where I had 8 hours when our office was closed to just do data work. And I think it's a kind of a remark on the fact that our roles as they've grown over the years have really changed from being kind of just sitting at a computer doing data to actually turning that into actionable information. And it means that we're in high demand, but it also means that we get stretched in a million places. So I echo that challenge. Then unable to find the data that we need is another one of the kind of top categories of the challenges that we all face. And I think even in the open data movement, and I joke sometimes with the Piton data initiative that we used to do open data before it was cool. Back when there weren't even information systems in the internet, we were working on democratizing data. Even in all the work that's been advanced to move open data into the kind of community decision-making sphere, it's still a challenge that we all face. And then, interesting, the third one is unable to find quality data. And I think this room, probably more than any room that I can imagine speaking to, appreciates that it's not just enough to have data, but it's a matter of quality and precision and making sure that when we're using that data, we're using it responsibly and telling the stories that go with that in a way that can affect change. So the various ways that you interact with data, again, this one's interesting, and it's really cool to see that we have across all the different categories of what we categorize as data users. We have everyone whose primary focus is on collection to database administration. The heaviest user group or user type was focused on analysis itself, which I think we probably all do analysis in one form or another. We have end users, and then data publishing and dissemination. And I think one of the things that's interesting on this too is that in a lot of ways we're both the creators and consumers of data, and so it's what's a really cool feature of I think the power of this group, and as we build this network, is a lot of times we're getting data from someone, recreating that and publishing that to someone else, and there's a really nice kind of synergy that gets created all the way from the collection to the analysis to the publishing and dissemination. And at times we're the creators, and at times we're the users. So I'm going to read this part because I don't want to mess it up. You've heard now several times that Kelly and Mingming has spent an incredible amount of time getting this right, and I'm kind of the one person that could mess it up if I don't read this right. So here's the agenda. All the events through lunch are here in the terrace room, so you don't have to worry about getting lost there. After lunch, we have this series of workshops, and some of those will be across. I'm a little disoriented. Across the street in the other CU building at the School of Architecture and Planning. We'll have staff and volunteers there that can help you find, and I think that there's a map in the program. And then after the conference, we invite you to stay for a networking happy hour at the Poorhouse Pub, which is a 5-minute walk from here. And again, we can help you find your way there. You'll get a free drink ticket with your badge. And if you have any questions throughout the day, just look for any of us who are wearing these Gary Community Investment shirts, and we can help you find the resources you're looking for. There's restrooms in the back of the room over here. There's a detailed set of descriptions of the workshops themselves, so please choose the workshops that you're most interested in. We also have an unconference event where we can look for people that want to have time to talk with folks and kind of make a workshop on the fly if there's things that you wanted to talk about. And then we have this game, and the attempt here is to some intentional networking. And so everyone has one type of one mountain of on their badge, and it's Mount Elburz, Grays, Torreys, Quandary, and Mount Evans. And what the goal for you over the course of the day is to take these colored stickers that these will remove from your tags, and find someone who's wearing a different color badge. And if you can fill out a sticker for each of these, you'll be entered into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card where you can buy USB drives, all kinds of micro data tools. And you'll notice that one of these will be yourself. So there's 5 categories. So if you have, I am Torrey's Peak, so I would need to find someone else with a black sticker as well. And hopefully that will be fun and a good way to kind of connect across the room in a somewhat structured way. So this is the most exciting part for me of the day, is introducing a close colleague of ours, Steve Spiker. We know Steve through the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership work, which is basically is the basis of the formation of the data initiative. And the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership is a network now of 30 plus cities across the US that are all focused on this key concept of democratizing data and moving it into community decision making. And it ranges from university settings to, I think we're one of the few foundation settings or some quasi-governmental organizations and a lot of nonprofits and NGOs. And Steve Spiker is kind of one of the original 4 organizations that were the founding partners of NNIP along with us. And his kind of senior director there is Junius Williams, who's an incredible agent for change. So Steve brings, if you want to maybe come up, Steve, because what I'm going to say has to do with what's on your head. So Steve is a man that wears many hats, and I think this is one of the reasons that I'm so excited to have him here today. Is you can see that in the bio, and I'm not going to go through that because I know his presentation is going to tell a little bit about himself, but he's a director of research and technology at the Urban Strategies Council in Oakland, California. But he's also the co-founder of Open Oakland, a civic tech organization focused on moving open data and advancing civic technology. So he's got a really interesting kind of cross-section of a group that's on the front lines of using data for social change and improving all kinds of systems in Oakland. But he's also kind of the Uber networker who's working across the Bay Area to try to increase collaboration amongst all those who are working on open data. So I think, again, we're very fortunate to have someone who has kind of the breadth of knowledge on kind of the open data work, but also the very discrete, practical experience of using data, and all the challenges and opportunities that go with that. So Steve's I'm going to turn this over to Steve in a second, but he's going to share his presentation about how he's used data throughout his experience, both in his personal and professional life. And I would encourage you, kind of when we get to questions and answers, I think that the format of the presentation is really focused on, as it says, community data stories. But if you have questions around some of his other work and more of the open data movement and some of the work with Open Oakland, I encourage you to ask that too, or find him afterwards and learn a little bit more about that work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
I'm going to do the really dumb thing and do a technical change in the middle of starting a presentation. So I have tested it. It does work. We will be just fine. There we go. Simple. How's that? All right. Morning. How's everyone doing today? Data wonks in the house. Lots of data wonks in the house. All right. I got to, well, enjoying some more great Colorado beer last night. I got to talk about spatial autoregression with someone, and that was a wonderful thing to be able to do. So the stories of geeks being together and talking about wonky things are very real, and that's a beautiful thing. So today I'm going to take us through some ideas about what it means to use data for change. I'm going to talk about some of the experiences that I've been fortunate enough to have. I've been in some really interesting different settings where data has been really powerful. And some of those stories I enjoy telling. I hope some of them will resonate. Like Matt said, at the end of this, there's plenty of time for questions on pretty much anything, whether it's the ideas or the projects or technical stuff. Those are all great things for us to have a conversation about. And again, you can, if you call me Steve or Spike, it doesn't matter either way. It's totally fine. I'm not Prince. You don't have to use a one-word name for me. It's totally cool. So as Matt said, I've been the Director of Research and Tech at Urban Strategies Council for a while now. And we're 30 years old this year, and that's kind of cool that we've managed to survive 30 years. And the organization, it's a confused organization from a public perspective. It looks like we do things that don't fit together, but they do. We do everything from research and policy and community collaboration management, and we have an innovation center. And we really find that having all those pieces in one organization brings a lot of strength to what we do, but it's also confusing because people will have worked with us for decades on our community capacity building or in collaboration management and have never worked with our research team and didn't get that we had this research capacity that's pretty phenomenal. And so it's a really interesting organization because what we do is so broad and the areas we work in, everything from criminal justice reform to reentry service delivery to affordable housing and foreclosure prevention and school reform. They're very varied topics, and people work with us on one thing and not everything. And so it's been a really interesting time being part of an organization where people are always discovering new parts about what you've done as an organization. So we're a social justice organization. We have a really amazing research team that I've been a part of for a while, and it's a really interesting opportunity to put a lot of the work that we're doing in the room, all of you, getting data, publishing data, using data, into action in a really unique setting in a city like Oakland, California. Most of our work is in Oakland and the county around it, Alameda County, but we do work regionally as well. And as Matt said, we were one of the founding partners with Piton Foundation of this thing called NNIP, National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership. And it's a really wonderful network of organizations that do community data work. And some of them are more almost into the corporate space, the private sort of space, and some of them are in the heavy lefty social justice space like us. And it's a great resource for a lot of cities across the country. And for us, it's been a chance to, so this room is one of those unique events as well, like the NNIP events, where essentially there are people in the room doing the work and there's not a whole lot of vendors in the room. And that's actually a really unique space because most times when you go and meet with other people, you're surrounded by advertising and vendors and marketing. And this is a really cool space to actually be with the people that do the work and not actually be overwhelmed by sales. So I'm a data geek, and that's cool. You are too, and that's cool. And we hear this idea of data-driven a lot in really varied settings. And for us, because we care about social impact and social justice and the outcomes that affect low and moderate income families, we think that data-driven is really important because we're talking about power and the dynamic of power in our communities, and that matters. But we're talking about how can a community level a playing field, and there are things that data can do that serve very technical purposes, and there are things that data can do that serve the change agents. And for us, the idea of data is it's the raw fuel. And Vivek Kundra, the former CTO of the White House, had this great saying that open data is the rocket fuel of innovation, and data can spur so many things. And for us, our work is about turning data into information, which is understanding about the data, and it's a matter about then turning that information into power. And so it's not just about the data, it's not just about how great we are as analysts and communicators and visual designers. It's about, in the end, how much can this data move the needle and how much power can add to an argument or to a fight or to a campaign that in the end moves towards a place where there is data-driven decision-making that brings equity and justice in our cities. And as Matt alluded to, open data is definitely, it's my thing right now. It's a beautiful thing. But democratization of data was sort of how we and other organizations started out doing this kind of thing. It was about data as a powerful tool. It needs to be in the hands of communities that need access to that data, and therefore data should be democratized. And we've now merged, and we've accepted the idea that this is open data. That's what it is. There's more to it than just getting data in the hands of communities that need it. It's definitely about opening it up so that everyone can use it for whatever they need to do. And for us, it's all about using that for planning and advocacy and change. And so another way to look at that same concept without the data terms is that essentially what we're talking about is knowledge. Is we need to understand a thing to be able to make a change. And in our case, the data turns into information, and then that becomes knowledge that we can use and work with. But knowledge on its own it doesn't have any agency. It just simply is facts in a computer or on paper. And it needs action by people to actually bring about change. And so this is kind of the formula that we work around, is that we get data, we turn it into information, and that then becomes a thing that someone can take and act on and bring about community change. So this is kind of our overall philosophy of how we do things and how we use data. Because in the end, the data that we're using is all about people. It's originating in people, or sometimes places, sometimes it's physical assets. But most of what we do is around people data. And people data originates with people. And every time we make a new case, we try and push for a new change. There's a story narrative that needs to go with that about why it matters, what's real, why we consider that real, and how we can push for change. And so as within a movie, as a story has to have an arc, and it has an origin point, some thing that happens that creates a need or an opportunity, and then you get into the middle where there's tension and drama, and eventually you move towards a point where there's some resolution. And a data story is the same thing, is that in this case, this protest was around a property development that wasn't going to serve the needs of the local community. And the data didn't bring the people out. There was a desire for positive change in their communities, but using the data to actually make their case and a really clear message and a really strong story about how this community would be impacted negatively by something, we actually ended up with a real positive result for their community. And I'll talk a little more about a lot of different cases of how this has played out for us in Oakland. But in the end, data is all about people that we care about and about their story and how they can help tell that. So I'm going to go a little self-centric for a little bit, not for too long though. I'm going to talk about what it means to think about your individual data story as a way to start to weave into how does other individuals' data stories fit into the picture when we're talking about large community level data. Because everything in the end starts with an individual. And for me, to give you some examples of what it looks like to have things happen in your life, and then where your data record is going, where your data trajectory looks like, what it looks like in your life. And so to start with, I was born in a tiny town called Alice Springs in outback Australia. And when I was born, I created a bunch of data points. I created a birth record, I created some hospital stats, and I created a couple of other things on some private health records. And so my data story starts when I was born with a couple of records in a government database. At the time, I'm sure it was on paper, right? And so we all start with some data points. We start as a crying baby, hopefully that sleeps. I have 3 and they sort of sleep. But we start out with some data points about our life, and they start to paint the picture of our story. And that was in 1975. I thought that was a great year. And then another example of an individual data point is that, so I never left the country until I was 25. And I randomly met my wife in Holland. And I was staying with a friend from Australia, a Dutch dude. And at that point, there was another bunch of data points that were generated. I generated some passport records. I generated some travel records in different countries. and I generated some new data files in a bank when I set up a new bank account in London, and a bunch of credit card purchases at the cafe where I met my wife. And so as things happen in our life, like we leave a data trail behind us, and that data trail tells a story about us. If we piece those things together, we can start to actually build up the story of this individual, this human being who's actually done things, been places, and seen things. But there's a data trail that follows, and that data trail matters because it's how people make decisions for us or on our behalf. And so another big data point was when I decided to become an American Australian, or an Australian American, and I naturalized. And so I generated a bunch more data points then by an awful lot of screening records and background checks and fingerprinting checks. And so I now have data scattered across all these US databases because I wanted to do this thing, and that thing required me to give up information and trust that someone was going to take that information and use it securely and keep hold of it. And security of information is a really big deal these days because there are points of vulnerability in our lives, and those vulnerabilities matter. And whether you are an activist that's pushing for change on the streets and protesting, or whether you're a person who is speaking out online about how bad the gaming industry reacts towards issues of feminism and the ways that people will unveil your data publicly and reveal who you are when you're acting in a way that's very sensitive and you're very vulnerable. So our data trail starts to matter when we start to actually act in civil society. We start to actually take a functional role in public. And so in my case, I have a few more data points created with every one of my daughters that was born. And so they have birth records, and they have health records now. And we have purchases of baby toys and cribs and things. And so we've generated all these data, but now that data leads to a point of vulnerability in my life because I'm a little vocal about things that I don't think are just. And that means that there are some people that aren't really excited about what I say in public, and that's okay. But it means that now my wife has to be cautious about how much data exists out in public about my family, and how much goes on Facebook about my family. And so and I'm a pretty mild case, and there are a lot of people that are very active and taking an important role in our society, and their data becomes a point of vulnerability for them because that data can be used to divulge information about their families, their history, and that matters because people will actually take action against them and threaten them. And so our data starts out as this benevolent thing that sort of tells pinpoint snapshots of what happens in our lives. But it also starts to then lead to some vulnerabilities. And we know that there have been banks hacked and federal agencies hacked and all kinds of things that have been broken into and people's information has been released. And for the majority of us, that it doesn't really matter that much unless we have identity theft. But there's an awful lot of people that are actually vulnerable. And whether you're a person who is an immigrant and doesn't have all the documentation they may need, that person is incredibly vulnerable to breaches of information about them. And if you're someone who's very vocal about feminism online and the rights of women to not be abused online, then your information becomes a point of vulnerability for you. And it's really important as we start to get into the less dramatic data sets we're going to talk about, it's important to think about the fact that all these data sets originate with a person, and that person has a story, and they have rights, they have dignity, and how does our use of the data either reinforce their individual rights and their dignity, or how does our use of the data potentially eliminate some of that humanity? And we'll get into some of that in a little bit. So for most of the things we're going to talk about, and a lot of the topics today, the origination of a data set is that person. And because individual data is very sensitive, and because we don't all get access to individual data all the time, it's necessary that we roll that data up to a neighborhood so we can understand what's happening across a community. But it's often impossible to do things at a community level, and so we roll them up to a state to try and understand the bigger picture. And as we roll the data up to the state and the city level, we start to lose all those nuances of the fact that there are individuals and they all vary in different ways. And we start to lose some of that truth as we get to convenience, to understand and model data at a city and a state level. We gain convenience, we gain smaller data sets, and we gain the ability to do trends, but we also lose the reality is that all those data sets originated with an individual person, and that data set, that model, doesn't necessarily relate to that person perfectly well either. And this is really important when we get to the nation level because there's 319 million of us. So I want to give an illustration here about a way to think about data with a little more sensitivity. And I'm not the most sensitive guy in the world, and that's a challenge for me too. So because people count, we all count, and I hope everyone in the room would accept that that's a reality. But we count even when we're small numbers. And I have a background in spatial epidemiology, and And epi folks and policy folks, we like to talk about things in context, and that's the right way to do it. But when we do context, we often lose the fact that it's still individuals we're talking about. And so this is a common thing. So we'll say that 39% of new HIV cases in Oakland are in the African American community. And that's a big statement, and it's a big number. It moves the needle, it makes people think about something, and that's important. And then that statement often is followed by, well, and then within the Latino community, there are 15% of the new cases as well, but there are just 1.5% of cases in the Native American community. And that's a really common way that people describe data, especially in public and in policy settings and in council meetings. And the problem is that by doing that and using that language in that way, we dehumanize the reality for those people. And so we've said that it's just 1.5%, as if it's a small thing and it's a tiny thing, as if it doesn't really matter that much because it's just 1.5%. But the problem is that 1.5% of the new HIV cases that are Native American, they're 2,000 people. And those are people that have their lives massively shaken up by this disease. And it's a preventable disease. And so we're talking very glibly about just 1.5% as if it's a small thing, as if because that's tiny, it doesn't matter so much. And the reality is that when we talk about the context and the rates within that community are 3 to 5 times higher than for the biggest group. And so it's really important when we get into using data-driven approaches to things is that we're not just thinking about the big numbers that matter, the numbers that move the needle, because sometimes you've got to make pragmatic decisions to move the needle in a big way. But it's really important to think about the humanity behind those data sets and the fact that this small number turns out to be a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of other vulnerabilities because of the way that systemic oppression is operated in this country. And so the just is never really just with data that's about people. The just is still people and their lives and the impact that that particular thing that we're measuring has on their lives and their communities. So I'm going to talk about West Oakland. It's a cool part of town, has an amazing history. Wrong water bottle. Too many water bottles up here. Sorry, Jennifer. So West Oakland has a lot of struggles, and it has some amazing, beautiful Victorian homes. At the same time, it's an incredibly poor community. And so as a person immigrating to this country 10 years ago, that was a really stunning contrast for me, is to see incredibly beautiful homes, big homes, and poverty in the same place. And it was a really hard thing to wrap my head around. So the quick history of this community is in the 1900s, it was a rail-oriented community and it was very diverse. In the 30s and 50s, there was a huge migration of African Americans from the South to the Bay Area, especially to West Oakland, for jobs on the rail and with the military and in building ships and weapons in the war periods. And then we had, as in many, many, many cities, this disinvestment in white flight in the 50s through to the 70s. And so the community boomed and it busted. And then 80s compounded everything from the crack epidemic and massive amounts of poverty and aggressive policing, huge amounts of unemployment. And then things got a bit better, but not much better. And then they got hit by foreclosures and massive amounts of pollution. And so as the port became bigger and more successful, what happened is that diesel trucking grew more prominent. And the trucks were sitting idling in these communities. And they were communities full of children and elderly people. And the diesel trucks would idle all day waiting for a call to go to the port and pick up something and take it somewhere else so we could buy stuff at Walmart. And the neighborhood had also, like as in a couple of places in Denver, the neighborhood had been separated from downtown by a really convenient freeway. And that freeway split the neighborhood in two and ended up with a situation where the community was wrapped by freeways. And so it was essentially surrounded by sources of incredible pollutants, and it had diesel trucks idling throughout the community all day long. And so we started to publish data and review the asthma rates and with the county public health department. And we found out that West Oakland had the highest rates of asthma in the region and some in the state. And that was problematic because that community had plenty of drama already. And so with our help, a bunch of community organizations and folks got together and started a thing called the West Oakland Indicators Project. And they went out, they got help from UC Berkeley and some others and started collecting data on the pollutant levels in their community. Nowadays, they're doing it much more sophisticated with GPSs and automatic detectors. And we found that kids in that community were breathing in maybe up to a cup of soot a day, of diesel soot a day, and that the trucks were generating the equivalent of about 127,000 cars in that community of toxic soot. And so we realized that this was a community that had high asthma rates, and it had really, really clear connections to why those asthma rates were the case. And it took a bunch of years to gather data, to map it out, to tell the story about why this community was being impacted, why that was a massive injustice, and what it was doing to the health of the children and the families in that neighborhood. And it took a whole bunch of data collection. It took a lot of support from us and other organizations and the Pacific Institute. And eventually, it led to a bunch of new laws and rules that actually protected that community. And it was everything from the trucks being required to have new emissions filters, and that was a big deal. The routes were changed. There was a ban on idling in those communities. And there was so many other things that happened that were directly going to impact the outcomes for those young people, because they no longer would have to deal with that amount of pollutants in their communities. And that was a big win. And there are, again, back to people, there are people that really matter in these fights. And Margaret Gordon is a hero of mine. She's a friend, and she's an amazing woman who, like, it's just awesome. Anytime you're in the same room as her, it's a really great thing to be in that same room. And she's a citizen scientist, and this wasn't her profession. She got people together, gathered data, worked with people that were supposed experts and us, and actually made the case for her community to be a better place. And she got recognized by the White House for the effort that she put in and the change that she made. And so the data started with people. Other people took that data and told the story about the issues. And then there was a really, really big change in that community for the better. Switching up a little bit. So this is another story about people, but it's a story about more of a nation and about the power that names have. And this isn't a comfortable data story. Many of our data stories are very benevolent and comfortable. And so you've all seen this, I assume. And it's a movement built on the names of people that were killed by police in this country. And it's a movement that's been incredibly effective at using data to promote change and to gather people together to fight for justice. Because in the end, this movement has leveraged tiny data points, single individuals, and actually told a really powerful story based on that reality. So this is the name of one man, and he was shot by San Francisco police recently. And the single name generally doesn't have much power on its own, except to you. Your name has power to you. And it's really easy for people, average folks, decent folks, to look at one incident and say, this was really unfortunate, but it was just a thing that happened, and it's sad, but what? But what about it? It's just a data point. It was just one thing that happened, and we can declare it unfortunate and ignore a single name and a single data point. And how the protest movement has been really powerful, has been recognizing the power in data and the power in names, and recognizing that every time a person is killed by police, that their name matters to their family, their community, and put together, their names create a trend. And so they're no longer just single names of individuals. They are now the fuel for a movement, because put together, they're an undeniable massive evidence that something is wrong with how things happen. And so there were two big efforts underway that were fairly sort of quiet citizen efforts to track police killings in the US. And they were individuals crowdsourcing data to track what was going on, because there wasn't any other way to really understand the scale of what was actually happening. And those efforts, they mattered. They provided a really important base of data for people later on. But the difference here is that the protest movement, especially sparking out of Ferguson, recognized that those data could be used to tell the story and to push for change, not just to track the outcomes, not just to measure what's happening, but to actually take this from a bunch of anecdotes to a trend, to a massive evidence that can't be ignored. And so after the community organizations got together, after new protest movements were formed and new advocacy groups were formed, a couple of the big newspapers started to do this as well. The Guardian and the Washington Post started to track police killings in the US, and they did a really good job of it. They gathered the raw data that citizens had collected over a decade, and they added to it a level of robustness and started to tell the story in a different setting. And so the story went from being told on the street and being told on social media to being told on the front pages of major papers. And people were starting to see that the data were very compelling, that it was very, very hard to ignore all those names put together in a way that provides a massive evidence. And as it turns out, that the president was listening to this, and there was a presidential task force formed last year, and I got a chance to testify to that that panel with a personal hero of mine, Doreen McKeeson, and it was very powerful to see people listening and asking questions about the data, about what this all meant and how we could do something with it. And what was stunning in that setting is that there was so much uncertainty about the data. There was so much missing from the formal administrative data systems that we had. And that was a pretty stunning thing to realize, is that this is a big issue. It matters for every community in the US. And there was essentially nothing formalized going on at a national level to understand this. And that gave me a really interesting sense of like how much disconnect there is from the community level where things happen, where people live, through to the federal level where we're very, very disconnected. And so the Policing Data Initiative was one of the big things that came out of this presidential task force. And they met in multiple cities at the task force and then formed this new initiative out of the White House. And it was, from my perspective, it was a really important thing because reforming criminal justice systems is hard. It's incredibly difficult. And sharing data and opening up data about police uses of force is a really hard thing for a police agency to do because it reveals a lot of vulnerability. It reveals a lot of potentially bad practices, but it's also the first step into building trust and building accountability into those systems where they generally don't have it. And it's, if you don't love Black Lives Matter, that's a fair thing for you to decide. But in the end, Black Lives Matter has been a 21st century movement that's used data in incredibly powerful ways to tell the story, to make the case, to build a movement around a thing that is a perceived injustice and to actually push for change. And so we now have, as a result of that community-driven effort, we now have the White House pushing police departments across the country to publish data about officer use of force, about arrests, and about things that traditionally there was no federal data set for. And it was kind of scary when a bunch of papers started to put out the reality is that at the federal level, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, declared that there was actually no data at a federal level about how police use force. And that was kind of stunning that as a country, cities have it, counties have it, but there was no one in DC that had a clue how big the problem was. And it took residents, people in communities, to use that data and push for that, to realize that actually we don't have a handle on this at a national level. And it's a long way, again, from an individual in a community to DC. It's a long way between. But it's a really big gulf if there's no data that tells us what's happening in between. Okay, another story about Oakland and about foreclosures. So Denver had some foreclosures. Oakland got slammed pretty hard. So we were, within my team, we were tracking foreclosures when our community partners, we don't do organizing ourselves, we work with organizing-based building groups, started to tell us that there were people losing homes. And those are anecdotes. Those are stories, they're anecdotes, and they give us an idea that something is a thing. And we started to gather data on this. And because open data didn't yet exist, at the time, it was pre-open data, we had to get data in various ways. Some of those were scraping data from government websites because no one was interested in sharing, because the job of those agencies was simply to do compliance with data, not to make it useful for people. And we scraped data, we brought data from private sources who government had given it to but wouldn't give it to us for free. And then we got some other data from other sources too. And we started tracking the foreclosures, and it was stunning. It was ugly, and it was fast. It was very, very fast, and city government wasn't able to really keep up and act and do much. And so I'm a geographer and a cartographer, and I love beautiful maps. And there was this moment we had where this is a pretty crappy map in reality. It's not well, beautifully thought out and designed. It's a mess, and that's exactly the point. This is a mess. There are 10,000 homes in this community that have been lost to foreclosure, and that's a freaking mess. And so we decided to not tweak and not use. We decided to put out our maps with a lot less precision and detail than before, because they really made the case. It's a big, ugly mess, and it's essentially affecting everyone. Even the rich folks in the hills are losing homes. It's affecting everyone. And then midway in that crisis, we started to see some weird things in the data, because we like looking at data. We did. And if you're in the tech sector, you will call this data mining, but we didn't call it data mining. We were looking at the data. And we started to see weird things, because it wasn't just Fong Tram or Jose Corona or individual names. They weren't individual names buying these properties. They were REO Holdings, and they were Sullivan Group. And that struck us as strange that all of a sudden these names were changing. They weren't people, they were companies. And we started to investigate and realized that in Oakland, investors were buying up foreclosures at auction from the county in massive numbers. And we ended up breaking a story, a piece of work called Who Owns Your Neighborhood, that revealed that 42% of the properties that were lost to families, generally middle income, working families in Oakland, had lost homes because of predatory lending, because of really shitty loans, because of Latino families being given loan papers in English and not in Spanish. All kinds of bad practices went on in the mortgage industry, and thousands of families lost their homes. And those homes got acquired by Wall Street. And so we now have massive amounts of absenteeism landlords in the city, and we have a huge amount of wealth that has been stripped out of the community and pushed back into the 1%. And so when we released this, we got a lot of attention. Two things that have happened differently since then that would have helped us, they're good resources. Open Corporates is a great resource for tracking corporation structure and ownership. And then a tool I just learned about the other day called littlesis.org, opposite of Big Brother, is a way to track people and power and influence. And so it's a wiki that you build to actually keep track of the 20 richest people in your community and what companies they own and what companies they invest in and how their impact happens on government. Really cool tools. And then, so we work with our organizing partners to actually take action about what this report yielded. And we did press events, we did community events, we took action at City Hall, and we pushed for action from City Council because this was a huge stripping of wealth from our communities. And what happened was everything from a couple of new laws to require registration of foreclosures and vacant properties. We had targeted law and code enforcement going on, which had never happened in the past. It was all just at will. If you call for a complaint, they will come. It started to become proactive to make sure that the people buying homes were actually fixing them to code as they flipped them or rented them out. So there was a lot of action that happened as a result of that. A bunch of new income streams were realized by local government. And it was because we were thoughtfully looking at the data and we put it into use with community partners, our stakeholders that had the buy-in and had the people power to actually push for change using that data. So these days, Oakland is a boom market, second biggest rental increases in the country. It's crazy. I can't live there anymore almost. I don't. And the data is really, really useful in a housing crisis, but it doesn't always do what you want it to do. And the need for data can be a paralysis. It can actually stop you from acting if you're so obsessed with needing to know the perfect right data and you can't find the perfect right data. It can be a tool that actually paralyzes action. And so there's an idea that some people hate and some people love, and that idea is that data is the plural of anecdote, and some people hate that idea and some love that idea. They think they can leverage that. And the reality is that in Oakland, the push out and the displacement is very real, and there are hundreds, maybe thousands of families in that reality. But it's essentially impossible to quantify because there are really no data sources that will tell you anything, especially about renters. Homeowners, you can track sales and see where people move from, but it's expensive to see where they move to. But renters, you really don't track. Like, we don't have a rental registration ordinance, and so we're not tracking renters. And so we don't really know how much it's happening. And so as a data wonk, I think data is important. And I also think that sometimes we obsess too much about wanting data to be right before we act. And this is what's happening in Oakland right now, is that our government is desperate to know the size of the population that is facing displacement. And that's impossible to measure. Some people have done research on it, and I think they're very fuzzy bits of research. And essentially, it's an unknowable number. And even if you know it, what difference will it make? Because the reality is the same and you've chosen to not act. And right now, we're choosing to not act as a city. We're not doing anything to protect families. We're worrying about how much of a problem is this and not acting in the meantime. And so there are times where even a data person like me realizes that data isn't the thing that you should always be focusing on. Sometimes you've got enough anecdotes to actually build a case for doing something. And that's a bit heretical, and I'm sorry. So sometimes when we talk about displacement and we talk about change and the need for better data and the need for information to take action, sometimes there are different realities, and those realities, they get kind of awkward when there's a lot of push out and there is a limited amount of land in Oakland. We don't have miles and miles and miles of space. And what happens is that when there's a decision to be made about how to use that land, we sort of get an idea of where open data and where transparency can fail. And this example is about a place called East 12th Street. And it's a piece of public land. It's in downtown Oakland. It's got huge potential. It's right next to the lake. It's amazing. And the city of Oakland has no open public data about the development process. And so from the point of applying for a permit, for developer disposition agreements, all the way through to the statuses of development and release of land, and none of that is online and digital. It's all in closed systems. And it means that the community doesn't have access to information about change in the community fast enough, because that information is very clunky and locked up. And in 12th Street, the situation was that the decision was made to enter into a private deal with the developer. And there was very little information about the stages of that or the outcomes of that. It was a closed door process. But the problem is that this was public land. This was one of the few pieces of publicly owned land left in downtown Oakland. And the conversation about what to do with that land was held in private. And in the end, they decided to build some luxury condos, and Oakland has a displacement problem for middle-income families, and expensive condos won't fix that. And so, because there was no data available on what is happening in the city processes and when things are approved and what stage they're at and when communities can intervene and say, this is not okay, stop doing this, we don't like what you're doing, this is a bad decision, there weren't opportunities to really easily engage because it was closed-door work and there was no open data about the status. And in the end, people weren't happy about this deal. There was a lot of protest, there was a lot of anger, there were a lot of really, really unpleasant things said to city council, fairly enough. And council kept moving ahead with this idea because they'd signed a deal with the developer and they want development, and that's fine. And in the end, it took the city attorney to say the whole deal is illegal because you cannot use public land not for public good. And building luxury condos is apparently deemed not a public good, and I'm okay with that. And so it took the city attorney to shut the whole thing down instead of having a more transparent process through the whole period and having accessible public data about when a deal is being considered, when a piece of land is up for sale. None of that was available and accessible to the public. It was a very, very clunky thing. So, like my kids' chalkboard drawings, that's a mess. And messes happen, and in those messes, there's an opportunity to do things better because we've now recognized in Oakland that this wasn't how things should have worked. This was a bad setup. We needed to have better access to data. We needed to have a more transparent process, and we needed to have community voices in the process of what to do with this land. And that's why it's great having Tony on the panel next, is that we run a land trust in Oakland as well, purely because community control of land is a really important thing in a community where there's so much injustice. And so there's an opportunity here to do things better, and there's an opportunity to improve data flow, and there's an opportunity to improve how government engages with our communities. So this is a very geeky reference, all your data belong to us. And it's true because we are the people, and the job of government is to be the custodian of data. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about open data. How many of you do not know open data as a thing that matters in your life? Who knows open data? Wow, Colorado is awesome. A few, it's okay. There were some hands. So open data for us was always democratization of data. It was always about getting data in the hands of people to take action. And open data nowadays has more than that. It's not just that public data should be public, but it's that it should be free. You should never have to pay a license fee to a government agency for data because you already pay taxes. And it should be unrestricted. There shouldn't be some weird limit that says you can't do this because maybe you'll get it wrong. And it needs to be legit, the original data, and that matters a lot too. But nowadays it needs to be machine readable so that developers, researchers, wonks can connect to the data and build things with it. And that's the essence of open data now, and it matters for us. And as a nonprofit, we've been publishing the data we get and improve as well. And so open data exists as a thing that's very big in the tech sector and as a thing that is really important for a lot of private companies, but it also matters for community organizations and for communities. And because we like the idea of data-driven, because it means that there's actually some traceable fact to a decision, generally, we developed this framework to try and sort of tell the story of how open data and data-driven cities fit together in a community context. And it starts with accessible and open data as the core. And if your community doesn't have ubiquitous access to all the information that you need to make decisions on and to plan with, then things aren't going to work. But this data analysis in a local context is kind of where we fit in, is that we It's great that like every now and then we'll see a project where a firm from DC flies into Oakland and gives us some analysis of our data, and they miss some incredible things because they don't know the local context. And that analysis is important, but then what a lot of organizations within NNIP and maybe some of the room struggle with is how do you really communicate the results of those data analyses? Because sometimes that's a 50-page report is not going to have the same impact as, unfortunately, a one-page brief or a couple of snapshots that can go viral on social media. So we have to be thinking about how we communicate data to get it in the hands of people to actually push. And then community capacity is a really big deal, and it's really hard to fund, is that if a bunch of wonks have access to all the data and have all the skills to use the data, but the people leading community organizations do not have those skills, and if the people that are trying to push for change at a grassroots level don't have the technical capacity to use those data and to find those data, then you have a disadvantage. You have an unlevel playing field. And so we try very hard to build in funding to our bigger projects to actually build the capacity of our organizing partners so they don't have to rely on us for every single thing, is that they can do some of the analysis and communicate themselves. And then we think that it's really important, and this is especially true for government, is that as data is accessible and public and out there and people are using it, it provides a really amazing opportunity to engage in the data community, in the community that's either the source of those data or where those data are being put to use. And it's an opportunity. It's not a necessity, it's an opportunity. And I think more and more government agencies are taking advantage of the chance to engage through the data that they're putting out. And that's a really powerful change mechanism, because traditionally government bureaucracy, the power of the desk, is a thing that separates communities and government. And that's not a healthy status, I believe, but the chance to actually engage by putting out data, by talking about it, by being involved with people on a level playing field is a really important thing that we've seen in Oakland, where people inside City Hall are no longer quite as protected and shielded from their community because we've had opportunities to engage around issues, policy, and data. And then lastly, measuring impact. This is Matt's deal. And this is the thing that matters as well for us, is that if we're going to do all these things, we really should take some effort to actually think about what is the actual impact we're achieving. Okay, no more frameworks, a few more stories, and then we'll wrap. So this is an idea that matters to me a lot when we're talking about government and how government can create and support innovation and where data fits in, is that it's called the long tail of government. And the idea is that on the left, you have a few % of people in the society that work inside government. And those people are great because they're public servants and they're doing work that really matters, and they don't get a hell of a lot of respect these days. And I think government people are great. But they're only a small chunk of the community. And then we have like us, the think tanks, the wonk shops, the researchers, another few % of people in that community that have access to data, that influence policy and decision making. But then you have that huge long tail, everyone else in your community that has an idea, a perspective, an experience of the data, that created the data, that lives in the badly designed community or lives in the wonderful access to transit community that's been created. And this is a thing that for us is important, and why Open Oakland exists, is that our community has incredible capacity, that is the people. And right now, the way government works is that only a few people get to have a hand in how things look. And we've essentially tried to blow that open by providing this sort of citizen, technologist, researcher, hacker environment that allows government to work with a larger group of people and think better, think differently with those people. And so the idea these days is that as data is more accessible, there are more points to engage, and that can open up. This is a bad thing. This is the Italian side. That more people can start to engage and provide input into and create the communities that we want, because there are more opportunities. Technology helps with that. Data helps with that. But in the end, it needs a culture shift inside government to be more acceptive and receptive, that engaging with people can actually lead to better outcomes. So speaking of expectations, so we all have expectations about our local government. And it sounds like to be honest, in Denver, it seems like the expectations are a hell of a lot higher and better than they are in California. So I'm just going to own that. Is that the problem of trust in government really matters, because it lowers our expectations of what we expect from government, especially from DC, but it lowers our expectations. And open data is not a panacea. Open data is not the solution to everything. But open data actually really matters in this evolution of growth in what we think government is and how government fits together in our communities. And it matters in the same way that as our reality changes about how freedom of information is perceived in government. In Oakland, we've seen some really strong improvements in willingness to engage, quality of information received, and responsiveness of government, because our Code for America team built a fantastic product that allows residents to really easily ask for information, to get it back, and it makes it easy for government to provide the information. And a technology fix, as much as solutionism is unhealthy, has actually meant that it's possible to save a lot of money, to make more people available to serve, and to actually change the relationship between government and community in small ways that are moving the needle towards a place where government and community have more respect and can actually function together. And open data is important in that setting as well, because it changes the dynamic again, that it's not just, this is my data, you can't have it, it's my data, and don't ask for it. It changes that dynamic to, well, I'm going to put it out there and I'm going to take some risk in doing that, because people might find that something is wrong in that data. And what generally is happening is that people are saying, hey, that's wrong, can you fix it? I want it to work for you and I want it to work for me, and not taking lawsuits against government. And so we're seeing more small changes towards positive relationships and respectful, dignified relationships between community and government through this. And it's not a panacea, it's not fixing everything. It's agency by agency, it's individual by individual, it's people. And I'm going to just, for a minute, recognize the fact that, so we've been doing stuff like this in Oakland for a while, and I think it's really important to recognize that when we started to get a little more into open data or into community technology, is that there was stuff happening in Colorado and Denver already. And I really want to sort of pay some respect to the folks here that have actually led in this. Is that Colorado for a while has been leading on some of the great good government examples with Peak Academy and some of the work that OpenColorado has been doing. There have been really fantastic things happening here. And so it feels a little weird to come here as the out-of-town expert when people are actually doing some fantastic things that I've leveraged and used as examples to push for things to be better in California. So I do want to honor that work that's been done here, because it's actually made my life easier as well. So thank you. And then when we talk about data and community and power, we still run into the reality is that there's wins and losers with open data, and the data, they empower a lot of people, especially technologists and developers, but there's still a big gulf of access to that power and that information. And the digital divide in this country is very severe, but it's becoming a data divide as well, is that individuals and communities that have the facility and the sophistication to use data for change are also growing apart as well. As more communities that don't have access to computers are losing even more now, because they also don't have access to the data, to the information about what's happening in their communities. And for us, that's a big deal. It means that there's a big power shift that's growing. Okay, I'll scoot through the last couple of examples. So one thing that's often missed is missing data. So there's a tool called SeeClick Fix. How many of you heard of SeeClick Fix? It's pretty awesome. I love it. Essentially, it's a way for you to report to your local government that there's a pothole, there's graffiti, there's a busted window, there's something wrong at a community level that the government is essentially is there to fix. And so it's in Oakland, it's potholes and graffiti, and it's people dumping trash on the sidewalk. And it's a really cool tool. It's a smartphone tool, a web tool. You can use it as you find something, and that's great. And when we started using it, the city was very proud of it, and people were using it and they were getting great adoption, and that was really cool. And the problem is that this is Oakland and this is the early SeeClick Fix usage data. And over half of Oakland wasn't using SeeClick Fix because it was a tool that was smartphone based. And so 30-40% of our community do not have access to smartphones, and 20-30% don't have internet at home. And so it was a really great tool that empowered a lot of the powered. So people already having access to government and power were further empowered by that tool. And this mattered because the city was thinking that they were getting great feedback on things and were getting good information about when to act next, but they weren't getting it from everyone. And so it's really important. And the city was responsible. They actually took a lot of effort and started to reach out to lower income communities, to more diverse communities, and let people know about the tool. And the new map looks different because they actually put in a lot of effort. And this was very rare in Oakland that a city agency would bother to step into engaging that heavily around a tech thing. And it mattered, and it meant the outcomes now were far more equitable. There were communities that were no longer not receiving the benefit of simply being able to report a pothole. And that really matters for us as we consider adopting tools. Who's going to have access to those tools? And how easy is it for them to use those tools? This is not a pretty story. This is an example of what we don't like seeing happening, and maybe what not to do, right? So a few years ago, our then mayor announced a plan to fight crime and violence. And they were going to target the 100 most violent blocks in the city of Oakland. We have 6,500 city blocks, 400,000 people. And the problem was that the numbers that they put out in the press about this plan, they look really, really strange. They look wrong, they look small, and they look not viable from a perspective of an organization that does violence prevention research. And there was no engagement, no community input into the plan. It was a plan that mayors love to dream up based on we're not sure what. And it was very clear that we're targeting the 100 blocks, the most violent 100, but we know where we're going to work and focus and have an impact. And we did a really hard thing. And we had a data agreement with the police department. We ran the data ourselves. And we found that the results were in another galaxy from what the mayor was claiming. And in fact, they would have had to target something like 1,000 city blocks to target what they declared were the 10% most violent blocks in the city. They would have had to target thousands of blocks to get that same impact. And so the whole plan was flawed because the data were really, really shoddy. And we're not bad guys. We don't hate the mayor. And so we contacted the mayor and said, can we talk? We're like, we've run the numbers. It looks wrong. Like, can you help us understand? Help us understand how right you are and how wrong we are, because this looks really bad. This looks like the whole plan is flawed. And the last thing we want in a community suffering from violence is a bad violence prevention plan. And they denied it. They just said, no, our data is the same as yours. And that's a hard thing to hear when someone says 10 and someone says 1,000. It's really hard to hear that it's the same. And we pushed and pushed, and they didn't yield, and we published the whole thing. And because we're open data geeks, we published the report, we published the maps, we published the raw data, we published the methodology, and said, someone take us down, someone tell us that this whole thing is flawed. We don't want the mayor's plan to be wrong, but we also don't want a bad plan. And they denied, and eventually they accepted the data were wrong. They'd based a plan on who knows what. And that was a really unfortunate outcome, because instead of having public data ahead beforehand, which wasn't the case at the time, the crime data was not yet public, there was a really easy opportunity to use information in a way that was poor and have no accountability around that, because there was no access to that data except for one little social justice research shop. And so the power dynamic is important now, because when communities have access to that data, they can question public decisions rightfully, and they can provide the research and the quality of response to government that says, we looked at this and it looks like what you're doing is wrong. And that's a really important thing for a democracy, is the people to have access to that power to say, we don't like what you're doing and it looks like it's wrong, and here's the data to show it. And that's a really big deal. So it was a very unfortunate result, but it was necessary to actually bring about, or take down a plan that wasn't going to do anything good. Last example, and then we can talk a little more. Well, I can talk a little less. So Open Oakland is the organization that I founded with Eddie Tejeda. We are a civic hacking, community tech organization focused on helping government to be more transparent and helping communities to innovate and use technology for the good. And our city budget was 16,000 lines of an Excel document. It was a nightmare. It's a lot of data, and you can't really do much with that unless you're a nerd. And our city had never really had transparency around the budgeting process. It was always a little clunky. And in partnership with the city, and this is a thing that was this, when we talk about opening government, there's a risk and a trust thing that really matters here. And there's a vulnerability when the budget committee decides to work with a bunch of hackers on releasing data that's never been public. So we get that vulnerability and that risk, and we appreciate that. So the budget committee worked with us, and we built a tool that would actually let anyone in the city see and to some degree understand how the budget works, where the money goes from and to, and it's at openbudgetoakland.org. And a number of cities have copied this product since. And it was very powerful because it was open data for the first time. It was a partnership, because the city knew a lot about the budget and we didn't. And so the partnership was important. So the public-private thing. And when we presented this to city council, the mayor at the time, the same mayor as the last mayor I was talking about, and a council person told us point blank in front of all of council that it was wrong. The site was wrong. And that was a pretty rough thing to hear in public, is that your data was wrong. Unfortunately, the data was not wrong. And the problem was that when you look at 16,000 lines and you look at a few clunky graphs in an Excel document, it's really hard to see everything in context. And what council and the mayor had seen for the first time was their budget in context. As they'd seen how much the debt payment weighed up against the police and public works. And they didn't like how that looked, because it looked like a damn lot of debt and a whole lot of policing and not a whole lot of else. And the context was the killer, is that they didn't like how that looked at scale in a way that people could actually follow it and realize that, wow, we're spending an awful lot of our money on this. And it was powerful. We had people on the street and in cafes that we overheard talking about the budget for the first time ever. And it was this really cool thing when organizing groups were saying, we're really concerned about what this agency is doing, and now we have access to see how they're spending their money, and we can use that. We don't need to hire a researcher to do this anymore. And so again, that empowering thing is a piece of open data. It's not all of it, but if you put out information, someone can make it usable by people that don't have the same technical skills, and you can empower more people to act. And so the cycle of data and power is kind of the same. It all starts with a person, and that person has a name, and they have dignity, and they have a history and a story. My story has a bunch of data points in it. Your story has a bunch of data points in it. And then those stories grow and get mingled together out of community. And that community joins with other communities and builds power across a city. And that movement of people can then push for change. And the same way when we group data together, we build personal level data into community data and city level data. And that data gets more power. We can say more things with it. But we've got to not forget that there's an individual at the origin of all those data points, is that those people matter. And their story isn't necessarily going to be the same as the group together data. And so it's important that we recognize that in a data set we have, in the work we do, is that there's diversity of experience, there's diversity of ideas and backgrounds, and every person has a voice, and that voice matters, and data can be a really powerful change agent to tell the story of a person and their narrative and their drama and their outcomes and their need for justice. And data can be a really, really powerful tool to go with that story to help people see that this isn't just an emotional call for action. This is a call for action based on people and their outcomes and their needs, and based on a whole lot of reliable information that tells you that this is so, and you need to listen to this person telling that story. And so data is the beautiful thing, but data without people behind it and data without the story are a much, much weaker thing. So I hope that we can have some good discussion now and through the day, and you can think about what it means to be talking about these abstract things, these technical things, these big wonky data sets, but always remembering that in the end, we're talking about people and their stories and their lives, and that those things matter a hell of a lot more than the margin of error. Thank you. Okay, someone else talk, please. There are 2 mics, apparently.
So my name is Lorraine Dixon-Jones. I'm with the Health Department, State Health Department. And my takeaway from this is that while data matters, really it's the storytelling behind the data that actually really sort of empowers people to make change.
Yeah, I think I've produced lots of big reports, and I've seen those reports do some things, and they matter, and I think they're things that shouldn't be thrown away. But I've seen a heck of a lot more impact when people are able to take those reports and take a piece of it and tell the story about how that means something to them in their community. And so the reports are a thing that have value because they provide a lot of possible information for people to use and take. And so when we produce a report, we know that not everyone's going to read everything, but we know that someone will take a few pieces of that and they will use that piece of information. And that's really powerful. So the report itself, again, doesn't have a lot of agency, but if people can take that and use that, then that's really powerful. And our public health partners in Alameda County are amazing, and they produce so much great content that we can reuse, that others can use. And so it's not, the report itself isn't always the mechanism for change, but the content in the report for us is really, really valuable. We can reuse it in so many ways. So yeah, the story piece is how people relate to it and take action from it. And our public health people are actually amazing storytellers too. They're phenomenal.
As you dig around and look at this data, what new metrics have you come across, or ways or dimensions of looking at some of the big issues today do you find most exciting? Or, you know.
That's a good question. I'm not sure that there's nothing that stands out to me as a new way to do that. I think the way that people are putting data in a national context is it's not new. So I guess it's not a new thing at all. The way that people are getting better at putting data in a national context and using that to push for change at a higher level is very exciting. Doing data at a local level means you've got access to a lot of gritty, nuanced data. And it's very hard to change federal policy with local data. But being able to sort of pull those things together across cities and build a picture that it's not the way that we spend money on incarceration is not just a thing that's unique to Colorado, but it's a thing that's the case in every single state. And we're not investing, we're spending. And the way that people are building the case across cities and states, that's really powerful right now. And especially as we work at a local level, that's a thing that I see a little bit with a little bit of envy, is that we don't get to work up at a national level very often and build up the case. So people that are building up the case nationally with those things, it's pretty exciting.
Let's go to this side of the room.
What is your take in privacy? So, for example, right, the data is about people, but now there is a lot of conversations about privacy. We need to protect our own privacy, but also the privacy of our organizations. So what's your take?
Individual privacy is really, really, really important, especially given what the internet has enabled people to do as far as doxing people's address information and revealing personal data. So it matters a lot. In Oakland, we had a really interesting fight around privacy of data from a surveillance system that the city was building with the feds. And there was a privacy committee formed because it seemed like the city didn't really care about how it was surveilling people without a warrant, just broadly. So there was a big fight about that, and that was very important because there have been clear cases of of abuse of power in local government for us, where in one case a city council person used his position to force someone to look up an individual in a city database because that individual had a criminal record and was on probation, and this person used a personal grudge to look up their data and actually take action against them. And so it meant that the community organizations lost a lot of trust in the privacy of the information they provided to the city about the clients they're serving under city grants. And so privacy is a big deal because, especially in disadvantaged communities, because there's already a trust issue. And so privacy matters a lot. I think there are, again, on that angle of opportunities to engage, I think there are things that we've left on the table. I would love one day to see OPD, our police department, doing a community session a day like this, talking about what it means to release crime data and what it means for individual privacy together. Because when we talk about wanting access to data, like I want raw crime data, I want to know exactly where it happened, but an individual that was a victim of that crime doesn't necessarily want me to have that. And we've lost a lot of opportunities to really have those engaged discussions about what does it mean for different parts of our community to have different needs for privacy, and what does it mean for government to be making information available. Like that's a big thing that really hasn't happened in many communities, is we haven't considered those two things together. We want open data. We're not going to release too much sensitive data, but we're going to release information that can connect to people. We haven't really had great discussions about that. So it's really important, and it's really unthought out right now in most cities.
I don't know if you're familiar with Kimberly Crenshaw and the African American Foundation. She co-founded it, and her argument is that as a legal scholar, with respects to quantitative analysis data, it is not reflecting accurately what is happening in these disenfranchised communities specific to structural violence because the information needs to be disaggregated.
Yeah, we do a lot of work on disaggregation. We think it's really, really critical, especially if you care about equity in a system, then you have to be able to disaggregate. And there are cases like in our schools where we uncovered that African-American males were suspended at 6 times the rate of white males, and that led to an Office of Civil Rights suit. So disaggregation is critical, but there are a number of places where disaggregated data don't exist, and it means that like you have no ability to really understand who is really being affected most by this thing. And domestic violence is an example of that, where there's just not enough raw data that helps us to really see what's happening to make better decisions. So it matters in a huge way. Yeah.
Right. So it's a non-gender inclusive
Correct.
assessment.
Yeah.
Any back of the room folks have a question? I would self-select back.
First of all, I'm so glad you're setting the stage and kicking it off. I think this is a fantastic framework. Great to have you here. Just curious if could you fill in the details a little bit more on the foreclosure story of the sequence of what happens? You showed this contrast. Here's the foreclosures. Here's the purchases. What steps did you take? And just curious if in that you guys ever use data to help paint a vision of what should be or could be, as opposed to only pointing out what is falling short of what we'd like to have.
Okay, so the connecting the two pieces. So we produced probably hundreds of maps to explain what was going on. Each quarter we do new maps. So we're mapping everything from specific types of properties that we thought were at risk, where loans were that we thought were likely to trigger and adjust, and therefore families would lose the home. We mapped default notices and trustee sales and the resulting REO auctions. So we mapped a lot of things in between the original foreclosure and then the property acquisition. And then we used a lot of different ways to communicate the scale of it at different communities, everything from looking at the relationship. We were looking at everything from the relationship from poverty, from foreclosure at a neighborhood level to crime, to see if there were some cases where homes were foreclosed and then folks would set up in them and be either selling drugs out of those or sex trafficking out of those homes. And so we were able to pinpoint some cases where those things were happening, but that moves very fast. The painting the vision of what we wanted, we created the land trust in response to the foreclosure crisis. So when we started to see at that city level, like it's a big, ugly thing, but at a neighborhood level, when you realize like how many homes on a single block are being lost, you recognize the fabric is being shattered. And so the land trust adopted a scatter site approach, which was really hard to pull off and scale. But we wanted to see certain communities that were especially at risk stabilized as much as we could. And so the land trust was that vision of we want to see community controlled land where it's permanently affordable in place in these communities. And the opportunity to acquire that is because they've been foreclosed. So that was sort of our response to what we think this should be. It didn't scale fast enough, though. That was the hard part.
I think we're out of time. Steve is here all day, so there's plenty of time to kind of connect with him during lunch or in between workshops or at the happy hour. Please join me in giving Steve a... And we have a couple minutes. We realized we didn't build a full break in, but we wanted to make sure you guys had the opportunity to kind of get up and move your bodies a little bit. Use the restroom if you need. There's plenty of food still left at the table. So we'll take 5 minutes. I know that's a dangerous time. Try to be back in your seats in 5 minutes. Make sure to look at the unconference board too and see if there's things you want to join or add to the list. Yeah, I figured it might work.
you doing? Good.
If everyone could start making their way back to the seat.
Hey, I'm not organizing stuff. I get to do something different.
If everyone could take their seat, we're going to start the panel.
Steve, loved your presentation. Do you have partnership working families at all? I'm on the board, and we're right there downtown. I would love to follow up with you about what we do in this presentation at our.
Good, there you go. No problem.
Yeah, I'm trying. Thanks for the shout out, man.
Okay, we're going to start the panel. So we just heard, from my perspective, a really fascinating and to me personally inspiring presentation around the role that data can and should play in community change. And I think as Steve alluded to at the end of his presentation, that he's coming from Oakland and has done a lot of amazing work in Oakland, but there's also a lot of amazing work happening here in our backyard, and there's plenty of issues that are confronting our communities as well. And so we have assembled a really dynamic panel to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing here. And it's fairly generically titled. We were kind of joking on our way in today, Steve and I, around panel of data practitioners and users. That's not the most inspiring panel, and I'm glad everyone sat down for the presentation after seeing that as the title. But I think what you'll see as Steve moderates, these are all folks who are doing really amazing things to advance data as a driver of social change. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Steve, and then from there we'll break to lunch, and I'll kind of talk about the afternoon and the flow of the rest of the day. Thanks.
Me again. All right. So this is a really cool panel. I know most of the folks on the panel by name or organization, and I'm really excited about this. So this should be fun. So we are going to start by giving everyone a few minutes to talk about their organization, the work, how it fits into the theme of today, and then we'll kick off with a few questions, and then this will be an open conversation between the panelists and yourselves and me in the middle. So I'm going to let the panelists cover their work and their organization heavily, so I'm not going to do lengthy intros for each of them. I'm going to kick off by proximity. You are the closest to me. Oh, pushback already. Sorry, Davian. So Davian is going to talk about the work from Mile High Connects, and I'll hand it over to you, and I will give you, do you guys want any 1 minute warnings, or you guys just want me to cut you off hard? No, I'll give you a soft warning. You have a few minutes. You might get a tap.
Okay. Right. Is this on? Can everybody hear me? No? I think it's on. I don't want to hold it like I'm at a
You can hold it, yeah.
like I'm at a concert. Is that better? Okay, so I'm Davian Gagne, again from Mile High Connects. Gave a little bit of an overview of what we are up to here in the Denver region through our transit equity work. The other piece I think is important to mention for us, with our collaborative, we have 5 nonprofit partners, of which Fresk, Felicia here to my right, is one. And they really help us carry out our substantive work. So in the areas that I had mentioned previously, looking at transit as the centerpiece, but really also thinking about how that connects to affordable housing, education, good paying jobs, and healthy places and health. And what we're up to really looking at in this next year in 2016 is thinking about affordable fares and meaningful service routes. So that's a campaign that we have been running for about 2 years now, and have been doing a lot of deep thinking with RTD around their fare structure. They conducted a study of all of their fare structures and programs last year, and really are doing at the same table with them, thinking about how they can increase their ridership as well as make it more affordable. We recently here through RTD, they implemented a fare increase that started on January 1st. It really impacted a lot of people here, making it less accessible, really impacting people who are transit reliant. And so we are hoping to take some lessons from Seattle and other cities that are really doing some forward thinking around the affordability of transit and making those systems work, because we also understand that administration of that is a big undertaking as well. And then another piece that we use here in the Denver region is the TOD fund, looking at our affordable housing work and community facilities. And so the TOD fund, some of you may be familiar with this, is another tool that we have access to for developers that can access the resource and use it for affordable housing that is located near transit. It used to be the first iteration of the fund was mainly for the city of Denver, and it is now a region-wide resource. So we're hoping to use that as a lever to get ahead of the build out of the transit, because we have noticed, and I'm sure we are not the only exception here in the Denver region, that when transit lines open and are being built, gentrification and displacement follows that pretty closely and very quickly. And so we have 3 lines opening up this year, and so there's a lot of work that we're doing, and there already is a lot of pretty serious consequences and things that communities are experiencing, and so we're really doing a lot of thinking around displacement and gentrification. And so Fresk and 9 to 5, one of our other partners, is really instrumental in that work and really garnering power and creating dialogue and getting information from community residents about how they are being impacted by the build out of the lines. Other areas of our work, we're also thinking about workforce development and community wealth building. Also looking at an anchor institution strategy, thinking about how hospitals, universities can really spur, equitable development around communities and really tap into the talent and workforce that is right there surrounding those institutions. Another area that we are doing a lot of work in is also thinking about our grant making that we do as well. I oversee that through our organization. We have small pot of money. It's not a whole lot, but really, how are we also empowering other organizations to carry out and support a lot of the goals and activities that we are engaged in? So that's really important to us as well. I'm not going to take up too much more time, but I will pass it over to you. Did you give me a signal? You didn't tap me?
I didn't need to.
I'm good. Okay.
Should we clap?
Thank you.
Happy Friday. We need more smiles out there today. It's Friday. It's been a week. So, hello there. My name is Felicia Griffin. I'm the executive director of FRESC, Good Jobs, Strong Communities. Not Fresca. It's not the soda pop. Our name actually stands for the Front Range Economic Strategy Center. Our organization is about 14 years old, and we work to build power to ensure that our economy and our political system work for all residents in the Denver region. So we are regionally focused in the Denver metro area. From time to time, we do work on statewide policy, but I would say the bulk of our work is really concentrated at the municipal level, and currently right now in Westminster, Denver, in the neighborhoods of Globeville, Lyria, Swansea, and we do some work in Aurora as well. This is a great conference for me to be out. I come out of the policy framework, and one thing that I know is we can't do the work that we're doing on the ground without a good foundation of data and research. Our organization is really, I think, unique in that we actually have policy analysts on staff. So we have a policy team on staff as well as a team of community organizers. And so, throughout my 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, I've learned that we can move policy faster if our policy is community informed and has a foundation of strong data. For me, data for data's sake is just data, right? You've got to put it into action. Community leaders talking about community problems is just talking, right? But data in the hands of community leaders that connects and supports their personal stories is power. So I would expand kind of our definition of data and research. We do definitely use a lot of the Piton. We use Equity Atlas, the policy houses in town, the Bell, CFI, CCLP. We use municipal data, stuff that's created by cities. So we access all of that data, but we also, kind of collect our own in some cases. So we train community members on how to do research actions. And a lot of the data that we also collect is, how do city processes work? So we can make an impact. How do budget processes work? And those are also pieces of data and information that regular community people don't have at the tip of their fingers. And so, we take that information, to community leaders. We train them how to do research actions. They find answers to those questions, and then they approach whoever the decision maker is, to make the change that they want to see. So the question for us on this panel was, and I will say, that Steve took a lot of my good points. That presentation was right on.
Sorry, we should have talked.
So I'll just kind of share 3 top points on how our organization uses data to drive social change. And I would just say that we have to make sure that it's the foundation, it's at the bottom, we use it of all of our campaigns. So data in support of our problem statement, whatever the problem is. Davian was talking a little bit about affordable fares or about displacement. We make sure that we have the data that's available, as we start those campaigns. And then I would also say that we need to share that data and make it digestible. As Steve was talking, I was thinking about a story when I lived in a policy house. And I was a deputy director, and the economists would come with the latest report that, we needed to use in campaigns. We'd have this meeting, and I'd look at this report, and I'd just realize, oh, okay, this is great. I don't know what it says, but this is great. And it was coming from a very academic framework. And so I would drill down with him and ask him, what are the highlights? What's the new data? And I started a process in that organization of making sure that we had a version A, which was for dissemination among our colleagues and our, academics and other folks, and a version B, which we could actually utilize with community organizations and community leaders, so they wouldn't have to spend a couple, days or weeks trying to figure out, what the data means for their community. So definitely sharing data.
30 more seconds.
Oh, wow, that went quick.
You can answer more of that question later,
Okay.
too.
And lastly, I would also say empowering community and helping community get the resources to collect their own data. So, definitely believe in community participatory research. I talked a little bit about research actions, surveys, and community doing their own surveys, and let me tell you why. A lot of processes that happen is, you send people that aren't even in the community to do surveys of the community. But if community leaders are doing those surveys and they're building relationships and building, more community leaders as they do that. So I'll end there.
I'm going to see if I can do this without holding it because I'm horrible at holding microphones. My name is Becky Boone, and I'm one of the smaller percentage of software developers in the room. And I'm a volunteer with an organization called Code for Boulder. And it's a smaller chapter of a larger organization called Code for America. And we volunteer our technology skills to help with local problems. So that might be working with a nonprofit or government on issues. And I'm kind of lucky in Boulder because we have some really great partners there. And actually 2 of them or there's quite a few in this room. But we have a great advocate in the city of Boulder in the form of Ron Pringle, who's sitting back over that way, who's really pushing through an open data initiative in the government, which will help us do some of those things that Spike was talking about. They have in Oakland where they have a little more open data than we have. So we might be able to look at government policies before they happen and maybe provide that outside evaluation and sort of a more interaction. And we also have Susie Christopherson, who works for Boulder County, and she's also somebody who's into making sure that open data is something that is valued in the county. So I feel we're really lucky to have those type of advocates within the government who are actually part of our organization as well. And we also have technology partners, CA Technologies, who used to be called Rally. They're a great B corporation that sends a lot of resources and helps fund our organization. That's about it for me.
Good morning. I'm Tony Pickett, Vice President of Master Site Development with the Urban Land Conservancy. And we're a nonprofit real estate developer. And not coincidentally, we actually share a common benefactor with the Piton Foundation, Sam Gary. And it was Sam Gary's vision for an entity that could actually go into underserved urban communities and acquire, preserve, and develop real estate for long-term community benefit. Steve alluded to it earlier. We are rooted in the community land trust movement, using often a 99-year land lease or a long-term deed restriction to make sure that the benefits that we create remain perpetually available to communities that we serve. Therefore, we're the developer that never goes away. So whether you like us or not, we're there. And one of the things I'll say is data is really at the heart of our work. Again, before we can actually go in and determine what is a benefit to a community, we have to understand the community. We have to understand who's living there. We have to understand what their needs are and what forces are impacting them. So we're often turning to either the Equity Atlas through Mile Connects or to Piton's data initiative to actually give us some idea of what that community looks like. And then we're actually working with partners to go out and engage that community in our planning work before we're actually producing any of those benefits, again, to ensure that the community voice is heard as we're planning and projecting and strategizing about what might be necessary in that particular neighborhood. One brief example that I'll give is we've actually focused 3 place-based investments in Northeast Denver. And in the Northeast Park Hill neighborhood, which is one of the more challenging neighborhoods of Denver. It's the last remaining African American community in Denver. We've been able to create a variety of community benefits through acquiring real estate. We acquired a shopping center that was burned through gang-related arson, created a Boys and Girls Club at that location. We have a K-5 charter school now under construction in that location. We have affordable housing at a new rail station on the A line that opens in April. So we're creating the benefit that the community wanted to see, and we actually informed that planning process through using data about the community. Piton actually identified very early on, before we bought the first piece of property, that there was a large population of underserved, at-risk children living in that area of Denver. So we have targeted our investments and our strategy of what we're creating with those investments. Again, with community input, we didn't just decide it ourselves. We went out and informed the community of what the data said. We got their input, and I would say to you all often, and I think you struck on it, Steve, the perception on the ground sometimes is different than what the data says. And there has to be a dialogue and an education process between we as an organization and our partners and supporters with the community, and to determine where the actual fact of the matter might lie. Sometimes the data is dated in and of itself, but oftentimes just community perception may not match what the data says. I'll stop there because I know we want to have a more interactive dialogue. So I'll just turn it over.
So my name is Brian Griff, and I think I'm the odd man out on the panel because I don't actually have an organization right now that works on primarily open data. You look at the program, it says I'm an open data advocate, and that's what I'd say I am. My background comes from, though, is I was one of the co-founders of OpenColorado. The mission around OpenColorado, Scott alluded to it, but really at the heart of it, it kind of goes to that point that Steve said, that all of, all your data is our data, is the people's data. So it's around that idea. It's around making government more efficient, and you can't really do anything with data until you actually have the data. And so that's where the data catalog came in to play. And so we formed that organization to do that. I won't go into more detail. If you want, talk to Scott, talk to Ron again, who's another board member of OpenColorado, around that and what they do if you're interested in that. And I encourage you to do that. The other thing I did is I was one of the co-founders of a initiative from the state of Colorado called Go Code Colorado. Go Code is really the next step of that access piece, is getting people to actually use the data. We have a lot of technologists that love to use this data, but most of them don't know it exists or that it's there, or they don't put it to a really good use. So we looked at the hackathon model and all these other things, and those have a lot of, if you don't know what a hackathon is, that's where you get a bunch of developers in a room for a weekend and they build stuff that kind of works. And then it kind of just dies from there. So GoCode came out of the idea is like, how can we actually get usable technology to come out of these events? And so that's what I helped put that in place. If you want to talk to the folks who are running that now, I encourage you to talk to Andrew Cole or Elaine Marino, which I know Elaine's doing a session tonight. And the guy raising his hands right there, that's Andrew. And Elaine's somewhere in here. There she is. So those are the folks to talk to. I think, this is a great opportunity for everybody in this room to talk about data and to look at what the use and how you can put that data to use. I think at the heart of it, and I can go into more detail on this, but for me, whenever I've worked on data, data is a tool. It's not the end. It's the tool that helps us answer questions. It's the tool that helps us paint that picture. It's the things that gives color or substance to what we're trying to tell that story for. So I think for me, that's where it starts. And if you're in the government space, I think that the idea that you really need to start instilling, and it's something that we try to instill with GoCode, is that data is the infrastructure of the digital world. It is what the world is being built on. Every big company that is right now using your data, right? The really big companies in this world, the Facebooks, their entire company is built on you and the use and the information you put into that. You are their commodity. You are the commodity of Google. You are the commodity of a lot of things. So the data is really that. And the government has a whole lot of data that we can build a lot of really cool things on, and we can do a lot of cool things with that will serve everyone. And that's the important part for that. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start with a few questions and then we'll open it up. I'd love to know from Davian, have you seen improvements in access to information and data around issues you're working on around transit and around communities? Has access to data changed or improved, and what's maybe been a part of that improving or getting worse if that's the case?
Yeah, I think data has been probably at the core of a lot of our strategies and really informed where we're going and how we're going to do our work. One example that has been, talked about a number of times this morning is the Equity Atlas. How many people have driven the Equity Atlas and used that as a resource? Great. So a lot of people know about that. So that for us was really, the first iteration of that was static maps, which were great. They, had it's like 200 pages of maps. How many people looked at that? Oh, okay. So those are some folks with some good late night reading. So those were really helpful. But we wanted to take that to the next level and really make it more interactive. And you have data in there that you could use and share and use to make the case for whatever work you were doing related to the transit system. And that was something that we still use. I think a lot of planners and other practitioners really find a lot of that there's a rich resource that really helps them to make the case and really activate their work. Another way that we're using data to inform our work, particularly around transit, we've also developed in partnership with Enterprise Community Partners, which is one of our partners, and the Piton Foundation, is an early warning system for expiring affordable housing that is near transit. So that is really helpful for us. Another way, again, to get ahead of the gentrification and swift change that is taking place here. And so that is a database looking at all of the subsidized affordable housing that is within the region, and seeing if, like Enterprise Community Partners or the Urban Land Conservancy can get in touch with the owners of those properties to see if there's any interest in maintaining that affordability, which is really helpful for us. Another piece that has been really, really awesome for us to use, Piton and Jennifer did a lot of thinking with us around our community level indicators that we developed and implemented in 2014, around there. And then so every 3 years we are going to come back to those and see how we are moving the mark. So an example of one of those indicators is one that we put together is 90% of affordable housing around transit it will maintain its affordability. And there's also other indicators. You can go to our website and see those. We have a whole list. So that is something that we use as a touchstone to see how are we affecting change, and are we making a difference in the lives of low-income communities. Another tool that we use that has helped us more internally is a dashboard, and Jennifer and her data staff helped us develop that. And that is really our internal compass that houses our data on activities. How are we making progress on our individual work plans as a collaborative? And that is kind of a feedback loop for us in order to see how are we moving in the strategic direction that we set forth for ourselves. So that has been really helpful. And then most recently, we had a release of this tool a couple of weeks ago. It's a story map tool that looks at our key geographies that we are working in for Mile High Connects, and looks at the station areas. And it tells the story around education, jobs, and health equity around each of those station areas. And so that's going to be a really helpful tool for us to keep track of, to see how the growth is either happening or not happening around those particular station areas. That's how we have used data to inform a lot of our work. And and a lot of other places too, but I don't have time to talk about all of that. So.
Okay. I'm curious. There's with more and more open data. Becky raised a point earlier that I'd love to sort of hear a little more about. Is that as Boulder releases some data, and as Colorado Springs releases some data, and as the state releases some data, they don't fit together very well. Would you like to expand on the idea of like where data standards come into play as we start to get better at making data available, and what you'd like to see?
So
Becky?
you're talking to
Becky,
me
yes, indeed.
specifically, yeah. Well, Brian could also weigh in, I think, pretty well on this one as well. But yeah, so for an example that I know there's actually several different organizations specifically in Boulder who would love to see our city council agenda be in a machine readable format so that they can easily see what agenda items are coming up, and then they can really get people out there to participate, because right now for Boulder specifically, one of the most impactful ways that people can make a difference is by showing up. So, the technology just helps facilitate that process. And so, more data standards specifically around like government mechanisms, like city council agendas. I'm not sure if that really answered your question.
Mm-hmm. I think that provides an interesting insight, is that data isn't necessarily just numbers. Like data is information about things, and it can be processes around budgeting and legislature as well. So I think that's a really important aspect of it. Let's open up to all of you for a little while. I've got a few more questions, but I want to make sure there's tons of time for everyone here. So we have a couple of roving mics. So audience, open slather for the panel. Anyone, everything goes. Related to data.
Hello, I'm Dave Murray from the City of Westminster. Do you have suggestions for getting through to large government agencies such as Jefferson County, Weld County, that do not share their data and charge for their data exorbitant amounts of money? What's going to change this? Because if you're doing an analysis in Denver, the world drops at Jefferson County.
Well, good luck with Jefferson County. No. Well, okay. So this, I'll allude to some of the questions that I know Steve's going to ask me a little later, but since I have an opportunity, the reality is there's a misalignment between the community and the government's interest in getting data out there. And what I mean by that is there is no laws that actually say the state has to release the data. So we can say on a board here, it's our data, but there is no law that allows you to get to that data. There is nothing that compels the state to give you that data. Unlike an open records request or something, akin to that, you cannot request the data. Now, people can argue with me if CORA applies, which is the Colorado Open Records Act, to data, but the vast majority is it doesn't. And so we do not have a law that does that. And without that alignment, this community is really hampered. We are at the whim, and we're subservient to the government because they get to decide what data to release. This goes to the law enforcement issue. Law enforcement doesn't want to release the data because it might make them look bad. So we're not going to get that data unless we can compel them to release that data. And so I think one of the biggest things that's missing in this component is we can put up all the mechanisms we want. We can do all the things that we want to release data, but we will not get the data unless we have a right to that data. And part of democratization of data needs to be that right. And that's so. Practical steps to help you get to that data, I don't know what those are.
Anyone else want to suggest some practical steps?
Yeah. So I don't know if you're going to like this answer necessarily, but it's something that's worked for me. And it's just trying to get to know some of the people that actually work in those organizations and trying to find that internal advocate, because I find specifically in Boulder County's case, having those internal advocates in those government agencies goes a long way, because a lot of times people don't have the time or the understanding of the importance of open data. And I feel like just having someone there to talk them through those steps is extremely powerful. So making friends, I guess, is my
a quick, I'm not a panelist, but I'm going to respond a little bit. one of the things that helped in Oakland was a long, hard slog of meeting with council members and talking to them about the desire, the vision of what open data could be. But in those meetings, we asked a lot of questions about like what data they thought they needed. And to be honest, everyone in office is going to feel like their data poor, like they don't have access to some data. And it was really helpful to encourage them by saying, we want access to this data, all this data, and we see what it can do for you, and we see what it's done in other communities. But also, like, it could serve you as well. And the crime data was one example where the council members had poor access to crime report data, and we could make that better for them. And so the internal cell mattered, but it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work to get to that point where there was enough buy-in at an executive level to push for it. So it's a hard one. Yeah. Another question?
Hi. I was just kind of wondering, on the flip side of that question, what are the metrics that a government agency who's experimenting with publishing data through open data can use to bolster their story inside of a government agency, and what are the easy benefits that will come to fruition?
Okay, silence. One thing that was that's a selling point sometimes is the internal sharing benefits. It's hard to put a metric on it, but the amount of times that code enforcement has complained that they don't get building permit data is solved by publishing the data. And so those connections are hard to measure, but they're really easy to tell a story about in the report about what this has meant for internal functionality. On the metric side, though, I'm not that guy to answer.
So I don't know if there's necessarily metrics, but there's probably, if you're in a government agency, there's probably data you're already publishing, wittingly or unwittingly. Right. So that's the first place to start, right? So like if you're trying to centralize that into an open data program, is look at that those requests. Also, I alluded to the Open Records Act. Look at your Open Records Act. What are people asking for? What kind of records are they asking for? Are they asking for permit data? Are they asking for health inspection data and those type of things? On the standards side, actually a really good person to talk to is Susie Christofferson, because Boulder County has done a really good job at this. Boulder County currently publishes their trails information in the trails data format. That's a really good way to get that data out there because it's consumed and it's really easily consumable. The bigger story, I think, for Boulder is if you go to Boulder tonight and go to dinner there and you open up Yelp and you go into it, you can see the health inspection data in Yelp for Boulder right now, because that data is now in the live data standard and it's being published out. Now, I don't recall if they're publishing it actually as a data set, but as a feed, they're doing that. And they're also looking at something else called the build standard, which is a building and permitting standard right now to release the data. So those standards help, because you talk about that, because what that does is it makes it really easy for people with developers like Becky to develop to that, because then the data works together and it doesn't matter where it's from, because it's in a current format that doesn't really that is consumable in a mass state. It's also like kind of what Steve was alluding to is the data sharing. It's also, you look at metrics data, like how well you're doing or how poorly you're doing, and budget data. There's lots of things that the government actually shares already that you just got to take it one step back. Don't release the report. Release the report, but also release the spreadsheets that go with it and those types of things. So
one thing I was thinking of, back to your question that you teed up, is, and I know there's a lot of other issues on communities' minds, but something that I'm going to co-opt from you, Spike, is creating a groundswell of citizen scientists. So if you have folks going to city council meetings or going to their representatives in mass numbers, creating this pressure, I think, on local governments, I think that could also be one angle, probably, in addition to a whole slew of other tools that you may be using to create that change. But that's just something I thought of.
Yeah, and I would just to answer your question a little more, I was thinking about it from the organizing perspective and how important it is to be transparent with your residents and your community. And so by having that data available and easily accessible, it's we don't have to teach research actions, right? And when we have those hard questions, city staff can answer them. And what we found, and and I agree with you, there are tons of advocates in city staff that want to make these changes as well. And so building those relationships internally, and those folks will begin to push on the systems internally too, to be able to have the data that they need to be accountable to the communities in which they serve.
Sorry, not so much a question as maybe a response to some of the things you've been talking about. So I run open data for the city of Boulder, and then Susie over here runs it for Boulder County. So I think from an internal perspective, some of the things that we're trying to do to address this data equity problem and sharing data is to do policy around that. It's certainly not at the state level, so it doesn't affect like the county sharing that you're talking about. But I think that by us doing it and by other communities starting to do that, that's going to have a ripple effect across the state of Colorado, and we're going to start to continue to see that. And I think once you get enough momentum around that, you're going to start to see some action maybe at the state level too. So that's one thing. And two, just to underscore the whole, sharing data is great, but sharing data in a common format is even better. And that's one of the things that the city of Boulder and Boulder County have been working on a lot over the last year and a half, especially around our trails data. Because obviously throughout the Front Range, we have great trails here, but it's hard to get that data in a useful format across political boundaries. So that's what we've been doing, and we've been kind of riding on the coattails of Code for America's work with the Open Trails specification. So that's definitely something, if you're a government representative and you're sitting in this room, go back and talk to your people about getting that data out in that format too, because it's just going to help everybody else.
So my question hopefully isn't too esoteric. I'm going to try to get it into real world. I have a tendency to do this though, sorry. So the question is really around data consumers. And I think this room is full of data consumers that want all of the data at once. But a lot of data publishers put data out there in, like we refer to it as like a one-off, so you have to click and say, I want all the data for this week, for this location, for that. And if you really want all the data, you have to do that 500 times to get all the data, and you can do it that way. And so, I'm wondering, is it the value of that for that data user? Is it a greater value to have it I think data providers think that ends up right in the hands, right? Because people can go and do an easy query, and they understand what's in it. But the flip side of that is all of us pulling down the 50 Excel spreadsheets or, trying to get the whole thing. Because once it's in our hands as developers or analysts, then we can present the things that, we create the reports and present consumable. Then, of course, we have our bias, and there's that side of it. So can you guys speak to, either or both? Or what do you think is really the best way to get data into the hands of consumers?
So, I guess what I'd say is, and to a certain degree, if they've already built a system to search the data, why can't you do both? The state of Colorado has a data catalog right now. You can bulk download or bulk upload data to that. So why wouldn't you do both, right? So you can have that for that individual person to consume the data. Maybe you have that. If you're looking at actually at this point, and you haven't published data, I'd publish it in the raw, full data set, because more can be done with that data set. Is there value for individual consumers? Maybe. But I think there's greater value when you release it in a larger format, because then the data truly has that context. If I'm looking at for certain individuals, I've just narrowed the context of that. I've determined what the context of that data set will be. And will it tell me the whole story, or will it tell me the story I want to hear? So that's, so I would lean to the word bulk distribution. I think this also goes to the machine readable. Like we always talk about, we want machine readable data, and we absolutely need machine readable data, but it doesn't prevent the agency from releasing a PDF of a report or doing something like that. You can do both. We're not saying this is an either or thing. This is be the most helpful that you can. So that's what I have.
Amen. Always download.
Yeah.
Those forms now, anyway, digital then they have to act or they that way and your car you don't do it. And one if one advocated or tried to direct the instead of out of that is that and it can't form be immediately made ready to fight that is trying So I can address like part of that question. I was a fellow with Code for America, and I was working with the city of Boulder, trying to increase civic engagement around affordable housing or housing, the topic of housing. And I was working embedded with the people working in that department, the housing department. And a lot of those people, they just don't, they just don't have the tech skills. There's no drive from within to do that. And so I think you kind of alluded to the point that there needs to be some sort of a policy to drive that change. And as far as I'm aware, there's nothing like that going on.
There's currently some legislation to amend CORA to allow for digital access to records. I'm pretty sure that bill's going to die. There's just been a lot of controversy around it. It's currently, the way it was written in the first way is it was not drafted well. There's going to be a really big amendment to it that makes it better, but I don't think that's going to pass. I think the reality is that there has to be policies like that. I think what Steve was talking about with talking to talking to members of your council and those type of things. I think if you're looking at a mass, like you're going to amend Colorado Open Records Act, you need to talk to legislatures. You need to actually talk to members of the General Assembly. We need to actually educate those folks about what the need is and how do we improve government in that context. There's nothing preventing state agencies from doing that. They are on Google for government right now, so they can do Google Forms to do that. There's nothing that's stopping that. But I think they work in antiquated systems. They do a lot of work on these systems. And I think if you look at these systems, what it looks like if you're looking in from the outside, it looks like these systems were architected to be neither transparent nor accessible. Okay? Hopefully not willfully. It's probably because I've got a feeling, if you're under 25 years old in this room, there's systems on the government that they're still running that are older than you. Okay. So there's a lot of problems that need to be fixed, but I think that the important part is that you all play a really important role. Okay. As your organizations, you might be 501c3, so the amount of advocacy you can do and those type of things, you might feel hampered to that, but you're all voting citizens. Okay. You're all folks that can exercise your rights. You need to do that. You need to actually make it an important part if you care about this issue, to talk to members of the General Assembly and other people like that, or council members or county commissioners or whoever you have to talk to do that. And honestly, there are a lot of really good people in government toiling right now that want to do this stuff, but they can't because they're hampered on how much they can actually do this. It's our job to do that, to be those voices pushing the government to do that. And the first way we do that is we have to get the law changed so that we have a right to our data. So.
Okay. Well, that's going to be the last audience response, unfortunately, because of time. And I would echo that as that we have a responsibility to act in that setting, but it also comes down to leadership. And if there's no leadership on the digital front, then it's just back to us to push on that. So it matters, and it can work. I want to end giving each panelist a very short opportunity to respond with an idea or a vision about what they think could or should be. And I'd like them to think about either an element of the data system that they would like to see improve, whether it's a piece of data that isn't public and accessible that should be, or whether it's a piece of the system that should be changed, that should be different, that would be stronger, better, would bring about more equity in your community. So from each of you, an idea that you would like to see, something that you would like to see change on the data front or on how government and communities work together front. What's something that's probably viable, but an idea that's maybe a way off? No particular order. That's out of the blue.
I'll start.
Think big.
I'll say one of my frustrations has been we're supporting a number of nonprofit community facilities in our work. And one of the questions I've started to ask is, those nonprofit programs that we're supporting, are they actually benefiting people in the communities they're located in? And very few of them can give me hard data to support their impact in a specific geographic area. I'm not saying they're not doing great work, but are they for kids in Green Valley Ranch, but they're located in Westwood? We want to understand that if we're going to continue to support them and look for beneficial locations where they can serve a targeted population. So I would say between the philanthropic community and the nonprofit community, we all need to agree on some sort of common data collection and reporting so that what we were just talking about asking the government to do, we can actually lead by example.
I'll go next. So for me, it's just, probably lowering the thresholds for information about where our tax money is spent. So we are working in Global area Swansea and working around the I-70 development, around the Western Stock Show. There's lots of dollars that will be spent there in the future and that are being spent. And so I think for us, just having wherever the problem is there's thresholds for that, right? And so we don't get to see the little stuff and where that's going. And it's so important in creating jobs for our local communities to really, I don't care if it was a small contract of, $10,000, $100,000. We need to know where all of our money is going. And then I'm going to cheat and take this opportunity because there's one point that I didn't make. And I just wanted to say that also we need to make sure that we're checking data with the community that we're trying to impact. I think so often, we create policy in a bubble and we don't check that with the community. And sometimes when you really get on the ground, you find that, no, this isn't the policy that we need to be focusing on. It's something else. And so that would be just my last word.
Okay. 3 more quick visions.
Okay. So my vision, again, is probably anchored in that community lens as well. Similar to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I know there's a lot of change agents here that are that intermediary between getting the data, making it consumable, and then getting it out. But I would say getting it out to actual like residents on the ground, continuing to have that be a focus, and that there's a way to build that capacity that you talked about earlier to give them the skills to be able to use that data to continue to really put a lot of energy in that front, because I think that's really powerful. And we've talked about that internally Mile High Connects is like, well, we have all these great platforms and really great information, but how can I go to a community meeting with residents and make sure they understand how to use this and to use this, for power building? So I think that's where I would push. That's where I would push for a big idea, and also to continue to support the work that's already going on in that area.
So I'll go real quickly. At Code for Boulder, we're working with the Community Foundation, which looks at metrics for Boulder County and tries to direct giving to areas like achievement gap, housing. And I think really the important thing about data, and an individual over here alluded to it earlier, is storytelling. And as humans, that's how we exchange information a lot, is storytelling. And how do we make that data really tell a story? As opposed to, graphs are one way to tell a story that only a certain types of people really resonate with. So how do we get better at using that data to visually tell stories?
We could probably guess what one of mine is. Pass a law that allows us access, but I think so. Okay, but I have another one that I'd really like people to think about. When you're creating data or you're a government agency and you're looking at the data, think about how you're collecting that data. And what is that data telling? What's the story that data is telling? And is there a bias in that data? We talk a lot about crime data. There's a bias in crime data. There's a racial bias in crime data. We cannot get around that. And if we don't recognize that, we're going to say, oh, this is how we should police our communities. Well, yeah, because the way we've policed our communities for decades, for centuries, has been this way. The data is going to tell you the same story because you don't do that. So think about the way the data is being collected and what kind of biases could exist in that. And I think that's really, really important that some people we just don't think about, because we think that the data is benign and it's not. So,
thank you for the slide that I missed. Thank you. All right, big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you all. Mr. Barry.
So I'm the only one between you and lunch, and I'm hungry. And in true kind of hacker form, we're doing pizza. Oops. Let's see if this is supposed to rotate to another slide, I believe. If it doesn't, that's okay. So during lunch, we're going to have a series of panel breakouts, and every table has a table tent on it with the topic that's being discussed. There is a slide that we'll pull up. I think you may have it. You have it in your packets too. Okay, so you already have it as well. But the topics are data governance, data visualization, which are tables 2 and 3, data interpretation and storytelling, which just came up a second ago, are tables 4 through 7, marketing and communication data, table 8, metadata, table 9. That's the first time I've heard anyone cheer for metadata. That's hilarious. New trends in data collection are tables 11 and 12. Open government data and data standards are 12. Open source technology tools 13. Planning support 14, and using data to foster community-driven action is table 15. Thanks, Ming Ming. So if the table facilitators could kind of get in line first, that'll be helpful. So they're sitting when other folks arrive. We'll be finishing up at around 1 o'clock to make sure folks can get to their the conferences at 1 o'clock, or I'm sorry, 1:10. And I would say that make sure to check the the unconference sessions if those are ones of interest to you. And this really wraps up more of the kind of formal part of the day with the 2 presentations with Steve and the panel. And we'll be moving into kind of more interaction and hopefully making connections out throughout the rest of the day. So it starts with lunch. We'll move into workshops, and then we'll close at the end of the day back here. Thanks.